That's not good. Okay, Boker Tov. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully the connection will be stable enough to get us through the shiur. We are continuing Masechet Beitzah. We're on to the next Mishnah. Daf Yud Bet Amud Bet. Bet Amud Bet at the Mishnah about 8 lines from the top of the page. So it says, Beit Shammai Omrim. We're continuing. We still have Machlokot, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel throughout the parak. Beit Shammai Omrim. Ein molichin chala u'matanot lakohen b'yom tov. Ben shehumu me'emesh, ben shehumu me'ayom, u'beit Hillel matilin. Okay, so our topic over here is chala matanot lekohen. Okay, we know there are a number of different items which we have to separate from food, which are given to the Kohanim, given to the Leviim, given to Aniyim. Okay, there's a little bit of a difference here. Our Mishnah focuses on chala and matanot lekohen. So chala is when you have a dough of a certain quantity, an app. This we're familiar with. It's still practical today. And you have to separate chala. Now, that is a portion which is given to the Kohen. Again, nowadays, we don't really do that because of Tuman Ta'ara. But essentially, the idea was that it's given to the Kohen. And you have matanot kuna from an animal. You have the zroa, l'chaim, the keva, certain parts of the animal which are given to the Kohen. These are parts of the 24 matanot kuna. Again, the idea behind all of this is that the Kohanim and the Leviim do not have an independent nachala. They are working in the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore this is where they get their sustenance from. We have, of course, what the Mishnah does not mention, but we'll get into it, is in terms of trumot and masrot, all those things which are separated. And the critical factor is that food, before you crops or whatever it may be, before you've separated trumot and masrot from it, that is called tevel. And that is forbidden for everybody to eat from. So the question is, can you separate trumot and masrot on Shabbat and Yom Tov? Well, we're dealing with Yom Tov. So midoraita, it would not have been a problem. But midrabanan, we say one is not allowed to separate trumot, masrot, etc. Two different reasons are given. But essentially, it looks like, midrabanan, it looks like mitaken. When you are fixing something, like you're fixing a kli, i.e. this food is not fit to be eaten because it's tevel. If I separate the food from it, so then it's now, I can now eat it. And therefore, separating from it, that would be forbidden midrabanan on Yom Tov. Now, there are two parts to separating hafrashot, trumat, and masrot. There is the actual hafrasha, where you separate it from the food, but then there's the halacha, taking it and giving it to the Kohen. So our Mishnah is talking about taking these gifts and giving them to the Kohen on Yom Tov. So again, Beit Shammai Omrim ein molichin chala u'matanot lekohen b'Yom Tov, ben shomu me'emesh, ben shomu me'ayom. So Beit Shammai says you cannot give these gifts to the Kohen on Yom Tov, whether you separated them yesterday or you separated them today. Okay, so because we're talking here about chala and matanot, we're not dealing with ordinary trumot, but chala and matanot are different in the sense that you're allowed to separate them on Yom Tov. Everybody agrees. If you shech the animal on Yom Tov, you then have to separate the matanot. If you need the dough on Yom Tov, you have to separate the chala. Right? You couldn't have done it before. It was impossible to do before because it wasn't prepared. Trumot and masrot, you could always separate from before. So the question is, if you separated it before, can you now give it, but you didn't manage to give it to the Kohen, or you did it on Yom Tov itself, can you go and take it to the Kohen? Beit Shammai says no. So that's Beit Shammai Omrim, ein molichin chala u'matanot lekohen b'Yom Tov, ben shomu me'emesh, ben shomu me'ayom. Whether they were separated yesterday, i.e. before Yom Tov, or they were separated on Yom Tov itself. At this point, and the Gemara will point this out, our assumption in the Mishnah is, when it says ben shomu me'emesh, ben shomu me'ayom, we assume we're talking about a case where you shechted the animal yesterday and you separated it, or you shechted the animal today, right? I.e. the ben shomu me'emesh, the ben shomu me'ayom relates to not just when you separated these matanot, but also when the shechita took place. It goes hand in hand. That's our assumption right now. We'll challenge that later on. Beit Hillel matirin, Beit Hillel say no, say it is permitted. Samrulem, Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai say to Beit Hillel the following. They say, Gzera shava, chala u'matanot, matana lekohen, u'truma matana lekohen. Beit Shammai say, wait a minute, Beit Hillel. We learn from a Gzera shava. Now here, it's not an actual Gzera shava. Gzera shava, in terms of the way we darshan psukim, that is, here it's being used sort of as a borrowed term. But it says they are similar, they're the same thing in the sense that chala matanot matana lekohen, chala and matanot, which is the topic of our Mishnah. These are matanot kohuna. Utruma matana lekohen. Truma is also given as a matana lekohen. So they're the same thing. Kashem she'en molechin et truma. Kach en molechin et matanot. Says Beit Shammai, just as, right, because the truma could have been separated before Yom Tov, and it had to be separated before Yom Tov. It had to be given before Yom Tov. So Beit Shammai says, just as I'm not going to take truma to the kohen on Yom Tov, so too I'm not going to take chala or matanot to the kohen on Yom Tov. So Beit Hillel say, no, you can't compare. לא, אם אמרתי בתרומה שאינו זכאי ברמתה, תאמרו במתנות שזכאי ברמתן, say Beit Hillel, you can't compare the two. You're going to say for truma, meaning it's right that you can't take the truma to the kohen on Yom Tov, but why is that? B'truma she'eno zakai baramata, you cannot lift it up, you cannot separate it on Yom Tov. The truma you have to separate before. So too, what are you going to say? Matanot shezakai baramatan. These matanot you can separate them on Yom Tov, and therefore says Beit Hillel, if you're allowed to separate them on Yom Tov, you're allowed to take them to the kohen on Yom Tov as well. So that is the machloket between them. Let's just see Rashi. Take us through the Mishnah. Rashi says, Ein malechin chala. He says, Afal pi shemutar b'aflashatar. This is the point. Why does Beit Shammai have to teach me this? Because even though you're allowed to separate the chala on Yom Tov, nonetheless, lo shalu le'olachata ela tikun. They didn't allow you to take it to the kohen. They only allowed you to perform the tikun. Letaken isato. Why are you allowed to separate the chala on Yom Tov? Because otherwise you aren't going to be able to eat your dough. So separate it, call it chala, leave it on the side, and that's enough. That is what they allowed, and no more than that. Okay, matanot. So Rashi has roa, lechayim, va'keva. These are the three parts of the animal, which are the matnot kuna. Afen halamatanot utlalo. Right, these as well you're allowed to separate on Yom Tov. Shalei nistaval aliman, you are commanded to separate them. And if you don't, how will you eat the rest of the meat? Now, this is different to truma in the sense that the meat itself is not considered tevel, like grain or crops where you haven't separated truma. But Rashi says, right? This does not make the rest of the meat tevel in that sense. Nonetheless, meal. If you don't separate them from the meat, you don't cut them off, so you're going to end up eating part of that, and that's going to be a transgression. And therefore, they allowed you to separate it, but they did not allow you to go and take it to the kohen. Of course, all of this is Beit Shammai. Right? All of this is based on the gzera that we can't separate trumot and things. Now, gzera shava. So this is the argument between them. Lav dafka tekulam midrabanan gazul. Says Rashi, this obviously can't be an actual gzera shava because we're dealing with a din drabanan. Ela dumya de gzera shava de rabanan. That's similar to a gzera shava. As I said, it's a borrowed term. Matana la kohen me-24 matanot kunain kashem she'en molichin. Right, so that was talking about Beit Shammai said, just like you don't take the truma, you can't take the matanot. He says, the ba'amoditulan shrei met moluk ba'a. Rashi says, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, you have to agree with me on this, that the truma which was separated yesterday can't be taken today. And it says, sheino zakai rashai lo nanu chachamim le'adam koach u'zchut be'afrashata. When it comes to, that's what Beit Hillel answers. When it comes to truma, you don't have the ability to separate it on Yom Tov. Therefore, Chachamim would not allow you to carry it either. Okay. So now says the Gemara. It says, Kas al kadatach shehumu me'ayom v'shenishchatu me'ayom v'shehumu me'emesh v'shenishchatu me'emesh. In other words, when Beit Shammai says, as I pointed out in the Mishnah, the fourth line of the Mishnah, third line of the Mishnah, second line of the Mishnah, second and third line of the Mishnah, where it says Ben Shemu me'emesh, Ben Shemu me'ayom. Beit Shammai says you cannot take these chala or these matanot. Let's talk about matanot for a moment. Whether they were separated before Yom Tov or they were separated on Yom Tov. So again, the simple way of reading the Mishnah is Why would they have been separated before Yom Tov or separated on Yom Tov? Because that's when the Shechita took place. So we understand Beit Shammai to be saying, whether you did the Shechita yesterday before Yom Tov, or even if you did the Shechita on Yom Tov, nonetheless, you cannot carry these, you cannot take these matanot to the Kohen. So based on that understanding of the Mishnah, says the Gemara Mani, who is the author of our Mishnah, Mani Matnitin, Lo Rabbi Yossi, Velo Rabbi Yehuda, Ela Achirim. Okay, it must be the Mishnah follows not the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but the opinion of Achirim. So we're now going to see a Beitzah, see what these three opinions are. Okay, they're all somewhat similar to the Mishnah, but slightly different. And then we have to figure out which opinion matches up with the Mishnah. So it says like this, the Tanya. We're now on the wide lines. The Tanya. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, lo nechlaku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, ala matanot she'umu me'elev Yom Tov, shemolichin im hamatanot she'umu me'ayom, v'shenishchatu me'ayom. Translate in a moment. Lo nechlaku ela lo lichan bifnei atzman, Okay, so again, what are we saying? So Rabbi Yehuda's opinion number one, he says like this. He says, Lo nechlaku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel ala matanot shehumu me'elev Yom Tov, regarding those matanot. Now, throughout here, we're going to be talking about the matanot, right, because it's part of the animal, but Rashi points out that, see Rashi, Molichinotan, no, where's the okay, I don't see it in Rashi right sorry, the next Rashi. It says ala matanot shemolichin. It says o'il v'zakai b'matan v'hu adin lechala v'chad minayu nakat. Everything we're going to say now applies both for the matanot and applies for chala. We just mention one, it's easier, but it applies for both. So Rabbi Yehuda says like this: Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel don't argue on the following point. They don't argue on the point where we say, those matanot that were separated before Yom Tov, okay, so a little bit confusing, but essentially he says like this. Which is, if I was to ask you, which is going to be more severe, which is more stringent? Those matanot which were separated on Yom Tov, or those which were separated before Yom Tov? Clearly, those that were before Yom Tov, it's going to be more difficult. We're going to be more hard-pressed to allow that, because you could have given those on Yom Tov itself. The matanot, if the animal was shechted on Yom Tov, so those matanot can certainly be separated, according to everybody. Question is whether they can now be taken to the Kohen as well. And our assumption at this point is that that is part of the machloket Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. So Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Rabbi Yehuda is essentially saying, matanot, an animal that was shechted on Yom Tov, there's no question that you can take the matanot to the Kohen. According to everybody. Right? This is now Rabbi Yehuda. This is not our Mishnah. You're already starting to see why Rabbi Yehuda does not fit, is not compatible with our Mishnah. But the chiddush, he says, is like this, is that even an animal that was shechted yesterday, if I have the matanot from that, and I bring that together with the matanot of the animal that was shechted today on Yom Tov, I can bring both of those together. That is okay. That is acceptable, even according to Beit Shammai. Right? Since I can take the matanot of the animal that was shechted today, if I take with that the matanot from yesterday, that is fine. And this is something we have. We find throughout Shas concept of bittul, or the idea of ikar and tafel. Whenever I have a primary object and have something secondary that goes along with it, sometimes that is going to be batal. We find it in Ilchot Shabbat, for example, when you have the laws of muktzah. So one of the categories of muktzah is a basis. If I have a base of something, and this does, by the way, it doesn't have to be a tray, it can be if I have a drawer, or if I have a bag, or something like that, and it has objects within it. So if the object that's within it, or on top of it, is muktzeh, that object itself becomes muktzeh. It's a basis ledavar asur, and that would be muktzeh. If, however, I have a number of objects inside, some are, or if I have the primary object inside is something which is not muktzeh, which is permissible, and along with that, I have something which is forbidden, that would be a basis ledavar asur v'mutar. It becomes a base for something, both something which is muktzeh and something which is not muktzeh. And then, I go by which object is more important, or which object is more which is primary. The other one is considered secondary to it. So obviously, if the mukta object is something which is much more expensive, much more valuable, this wouldn't work. But that is the classic case that's brought is the example of if I have a tray on the table and I have my candlesticks on top, so the candlesticks are mukta. If before Shabbos I have the tray and I have the challah and the candlesticks, so then it's a basis of mutar ve'asur. So that is the concept of where I have something primary and secondary. Of course, it comes up in Ilchot Brachot, comes up in many places, but Ilchot Kashrut as well. So here what we're saying is that the matanot of the animal which are shechted yesterday would essentially become tafel to those of which were taken today, and you can take them both, says Rabbi Yehuda. So what is the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel? Okay, so he said again, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, lo nechleku Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel ala matanot shemum el Yom Tov. שמוליכין הם המתנות שמול מהיום, ושנשחטו מהיום. Now, לא נחלקו, third wide line, לא נחלקו אלא לא ליכן בפני עצמן. The מחלוקת is, can I take by themselves matanot of an animal that was shechted yesterday on Erev Yom Tov, שבית שמאי אומרים אין מוליכין, ובית הלל אומרים מוליכין. Beit Shammai say no, and Beit Hillel say yes. But so what do I see from that? I see the machloket is only on an animal that was shechted yesterday. The machloket is not on an animal that was shechted today. So that therefore seems incompatible with the way we've understood our Mishnah. Now, just to finish off, so Rabbi Yehuda explains what the argument between them was, what's behind it. He says, "V'kach hayu Beit Shammai danin." This is where Beit Shammai learned from. They said, "Chala matanot matana lakohen, utruma matana lakohen." Chala and matanot are matana for the kohen, and so is truma. Keshem she'en molichin et truma. Just as we can't transport the truma that was separated before Yom Tov, kach en molichin et matanot. So too, we can't take the matanot that was separated before Yom Tov. Amud and Beit Hillel answer back, lo, im amartim b'truma she'eno zakai b'aramata, tomru b'matanot she'zakai b'aramata. So, but yeah, again, that's what we've said in our Mishnah. You can't compare. Truma, you couldn't separate on Yom Tov. The matanot you could separate on Yom Tov, and therefore, even though you separated them before, you can still carry them. Okay, so that is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Second opinion in the right is Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says something a little bit different. Amar Rabbi Yossi, lo nechlaku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel ala matanot shemolichin, lo nechlaku ela ala truma, shebeit Shammai omrim ein molichin, ubeit Hillel omrim molichin. So Rabbi Yossi is even more far-reaching. Rabbi Yossi says regarding matanot, there is no machloket at all. But whenever they were separated, since these are, again, the matanot could be separated on Yom Tov, so whether they were or they weren't, but nonetheless, you can take them to the Kohen, according to Beit Shammai, according to Beit Hillel, according to everybody. What's the machloket? Machloket is only about truma. Lo nechlaku ala truma. Shebeit Shammai omrim ein molichin, ubeit Hillel omrim molichin. Truma, which was obviously separated before Yom Tov. So Beit Shammai says, okay, you separated it before Yom Tov. Now it's Yom Tov. What are you going to go give the truma to the Kohen? You can't do that. And Beit Hillel say, yes, you can. V'kach hayu Beit Hillel danin. Chalal matanot matana lakohen. Utruma matana lakohen. Kashem shemolichin et matanot, kach molichin et truma. Okay, so according to this version, it's Beit Hillel who learns it the other way around. They learn from matana and chala to truma. Just as chalan matanot matana lakohen, and according to everybody, that can be, you can take that to the kohen on Yom Tov. So too, truma, which is a matana, you can take to the kohen on Yom Tov. Amrulam Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai answer back to them, no. Lo, im amatim b'matanot shezakai b'aramatan, tomru b'truma she'en zakai b'aramatan. Yeah, it's Beit Shammai who say, no, you can't compare the two, because truma, you can't separate on Yom Tov, whereas matanot you can. So the way we learned in our Mishnah, and the way Rabbi Yehuda learned, was that it's Beit Shammai who makes the comparison between chala and matanot to truma, and Beit Hillel say no, it's different. According to Rabbi Yossi's version, it works exactly the opposite way around. It's Beit Hillel that are making the comparison, the limit of where Chalan Matanot are being learned from Truma, and Beit Shammai are saying, no, you can't compare the two. Okay, but essentially, very clearly, Rabbi Yossi's opinion, Vadai, cannot match up with our Mishnah, and Rabbi Yehuda's opinion also cannot match up with the way that we have learned our Mishnah. So it must be the third opinion, which is Acherim. So Acherim Omrim, Lo nechlaku Beit Shammai u Beit Hillel ala Truma she'en molichin. Lo nechlaku ela ala matanot. So he says. So we say now the opposite of Rabbi Yossi, and this sounds more like our Mishnah. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, there's no machloket about Truma. Everybody agrees that Truma, which was separated before Yom Tov, you cannot take to the Kohen on Yom Tov. The machloket is regarding the matanot. And now it sounds like all matanot. He doesn't make a distinction here between things which were separated yesterday or today. Shebeit Shammai omrim ein molichin, uBeit Hillel omrim molichin. Beit Shammai says no, you cannot take to the Kohen, and Beit Hillel says you can. So that sounds very much like our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, therefore, Leima Acherim Ivelo Rabbi Yehuda. Let's say that our Mishnah is Acherim, and it is not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rava Miktani Shehumu Me'ayom V'Shenishchatu Me'ayom. Okay, we go back to our Mishnah. Have a look at our Mishnah again. What does it say? The Mishnah says that Beit Shammai said you can't take the matanot ben shehumu me'emesh, ben shehumu me'ayom. Whether they were separated yesterday or whether they were separated today. It doesn't say. Now we assumed, we said we assumed that it therefore means that those when would you separate these matanot? At the time of shchita. So they were separated from before Yom Tov, means the shchita took place before Yom Tov. They were separated on Yom Tov, the shchita took place on Yom Tov. Says here Rava, you're reading in and ukimta into the Mishnah, it's not there. Right? It says, it doesn't say that the matanot you're talking about that were separated on Yom Tov is where shchita took place on Yom Tov. It's shemuktani. It just says they were separated today. Uleolam shchitatan me'emesh. Says Rava, no, that our Mishnah and Beit Shammai was so stringent. Beit Shammai are not stringent to the point of saying that if you shechted an animal today on Yom Tov, and today you separated the matanot, there's no other time you could have separated it, that you can't take it to the Kohen. They're saying, if you shechted the animal yesterday, and you were negligent, you didn't separate the matanot yet. So you're allowed to separate the matanot on Yom Tov, but now you can't go and take them to the Kohen. That's a step too far. He says that's what the Mishnah is saying. And that is exactly the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that we saw in the Mishnah. That was the first case. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda said that Beit Shammai would even agree that if you have these matanot which were separated yesterday, they could go together with those that were separated today. But so therefore, Marava Miktani Shomu Me'ayom Shenishchatu Me'ayom Shemuktani Uleolam Shchitatan Me'emesh. Okay, so if the shchita took place yesterday, then we say Leima Rabbi Yudai Velo Echerim. Therefore, we can now say that our Mishnah actually fits in, is compatible with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so Rabbi wants to say our opinion it's Rabbi Yehuda and not Acherim. Then says the Gemara, actually, it could be compatible with both of them. So Afilu Teima Acherim. Okay, but what did we see? We saw it just said that it was talking about all matanot. What was it said? Acherim omrim, that Beit Shammai said you can't take the matanot. So in the same way that we previously made a qualification of our Mishnah, we could add in a qualification to the Beitzah and make it now compatible with the Mishnah. He says, "V'hanach denishchatu me'emesh." He says he's talking about when he says Beit Shammai said no. He's talking about those which were separated yesterday. Those which were shechted yesterday before Yom Tov. So if we say that, but then what comes out of this is that the first opinion and the third opinion in the Beitzah are exactly the same. Right? If that's the case, well then we would say Haynu Rabbi Yehuda. That's exactly the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that we saw earlier. Answers that no, Ikabanayu Tfela. That what is between them? What is the nafkamina between the two cases? It is the case of tefillah, the case of those matanot which were separated yesterday, that those are going to be tafel, that those could go along with the matanot which you separate today, according to Beit Shammai. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that would be permitted, and according to Acherim Omrim, that would not be permitted. Okay, so what comes out of this? So what do we see? Is that our Mishnah, we had a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. The question was, you're allowed to separate chala and matanot, on Yom Tov, because if you weren't allowed to separate it, unlike Tevel Truma can only be separated before. But chala and matanot, because you may be a situation where the food is not ready and it was impossible to separate before Yom Tov, therefore on Yom Tov you're allowed to separate it. Can you also take it to the Kohen? So Beit Hillel says yes, and Beit Shammai said no. The question was, what is the case that we're talking about where Beit Shammai said no? Originally, we learned our Mishnah, and it sounded like very clear-cut. It said at any time, whether it was separated before Yom Tov, whether it was separated on Yom Tov, okay? And we assume that means even if the Shechita took place on Yom Tov. According to the conclusion of the Gemara, and this may be compatible both with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and with the opinion of Acherim, that if the Shechita takes place on Yom Tov itself, so then there is no question. Then Beit Shammai are going to allow it as well. The problem is, the case is where the Shechita took place, before Yom Tov, and then whether the matanot were separated already then, but on Erev Yom Tov, or they were separated on Yom Tov itself. That is what Beit Shammai is being stringent about. Okay, so let's just see Rashi on this. Rashi where he says, "Lema acherimi v'lo Rabbi Yehuda." That was at first when we saw the Beitzah, and initially we understood that Beit Shammai is talking about a case even where the Shechita took place on Yom Tov, and therefore we said it's like the opinion of Acherim and not of Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rashi, "Lema acherimi v'lo Rabbi Yehuda." Klomar, Rabbi Yossi v'adai lo efshar lukma. You definitely can't, right? Because Rabbi Yossi is talking about truma. There's no question that's not compatible with our mission. Rabbi Yehuda mai. Could you say it's like Rabbi Yehuda? Mi matzina lemeimad matniti nami davka b'shel emesh kamal umito kamalibe. In other words, could you say that the Mishnah is talking about specifically where the Shechita took place before Yom Tov, and then it does fit with Rabbi Yehuda? Or do we have to say that it's not like Rabbi Yehuda? So originally we said that, and then we changed it. Said Rava miktani. Matnitin ben shehumu v'nishchatu me'ayom. Right? Our Mishnah does not say the Beit Shammai says that it was nishchat on Yom Tov. Ulolam shchitatan me'emesh. The Mishnah is only talking about a case where shchita took place before Yom Tov. But if the animal was shechted on Yom Tov, then Beit Shammai would agree that you can take the matanot. Leima Rabbi Yehuda v'lo acherim. So then we said, okay, so now you have to say the opposite, that it only fits with Rabbi Yehuda, not with acherim. Since now we said the Mishnah is only talking about a case where you shechted the animal before Yom Tov. Let's say it's not like acherim. Why? The acherim al hamatanot kamri was talking about all matanot. He didn't make that distinction. And then we say, no, well, just as we read that distinction into the Mishnah before, we now read that distinction into our Beitzah. And we say, Tfeilah, Rabbi Yehuda matil letafel ulolich shel emesh im shel hayom. That was the nafkamina at the end of the day between Rabbi Yehuda and Acherim. Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, you can take those from the animal which was shechted yesterday as a secondary thing. Acherim says no, that Beit Shammai forbid that as well. Since that topic is not addressed by our Mishnah, we can say that the Mishnah is compatible with either one of those two opinions. Okay, Ad Khan, we got up to the two dots, and we'll carry on from there next week. Wonderful day, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you.
Have a good day,
care.
guys. You should tell.
Thank you.